we are hearing from 2 specific vendors. I let people know sort of why they are on my short list.
Short list.
My short list, yes. It's a long day. She's already starting at 8:36.
And she's not even supposed to be here.
She snuck in. One of the reasons why I'm putting Bookworms before you today is that it is part of the approved compendium of resources that the state has put out. Bookworms also has a strong commitment to equity. We talked yesterday about why some of the other programs did not make the cut because of their culturally destructive status from the NYU study that was done. In the next week or so, I will be following up with everybody in the room to ask if there are any further questions from the vendors, and then I will be asking you by the end of school to sort of make your choice. As we go forward, it will be a conversation about unpacking, it will be a conversation about what part of the program you're going to try and what support is needed. So I want to remember, Marcia came up to me this morning and had some really great ideas and questions. This is the start of this process, so there will be a lot of pieces along the way that you'll have a lot of choice on, and there will be a lot of pieces that we're going to want your input on. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. Nicole is a former Milford. She's been in Milford before. Oh, see, that's why you're feisty back then. So Nicole is our Bookworms rep, and I'm going to turn it over to her to get started.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. I hope this mic is working. All right, great. Okay. Good morning. I am Nicole Rizzo. I live in West Haven, about 15 minutes away. I was a teacher. I taught in Milford with Kelly and Amy at Cap 10, and had the great opportunity to learn from both of them. And wow, what a full circle moment. And so I'm sweating a little bit. It's always stressful to present to colleagues. So thank you for having me. I left the classroom in 2020 and decided to step into the nonprofit space, and that's how I ended up working with Open Up Resources and Bookworms. So I am absolutely thrilled to be here. My goal always is to answer as many of your questions as possible. So I will be working from slides, but please, you don't need to raise your hand, just yell out at me, interrupt me, ask the questions, because I understand how important this decision is, the impact that it has on students, and I want to make sure that you are supported in making this important decision. So we will be, I wanted to make sure that you have access to our website today. It is an open resource, and so you can create a free account with your Milford email address, but also this is our universal login, so you don't have to go through the confirming your email, all of that stuff. So I will come back to this slide as well, because we are going to have some time to review the materials and just have some guided exploration. So when we get to that point, I'll put this slide back up on the screen. A little bit about Open Up Resources and who we are. We are a nonprofit, like I mentioned. Our mission is around improving equity in education by making sure that every student everywhere has access to high quality instructional materials. And we do this by providing all of our materials openly on our website. So Open Up Resources, we're kind of like a liaison between school districts and program authors. So Bookworms is authored by the University of Delaware team. We aggregate all of the trade books that are used with the program, and we print all of the teacher guides and the resources that you see up here on the table. And we make sure that those get delivered to districts to support high quality implementation. We also support districts through professional learning, knowing that choosing a program is the first step to a successful implementation. As an educators, the program or the curriculum is a resource. The invaluable resource is you as a teacher and the pedagogy and instructional decisions you're making. And so we really value that professional learning and wraparound support as we walk along with you on your journey. We work with some of the leading pedagogical guides in education, like Stanford University and Ed. And we think about our mission in classroom equity through the lens of 3 pillars: access, high quality instructional materials, and community. So access is in high quality instructional materials. We really think about that with our website and putting all of the materials as much as we possibly can openly available. So even if your district or your school is not implementing Bookworms and you don't have a program to use, you can use something as a teacher. We also really believe strongly in fostering classroom communities and school communities where we're celebrating diversity and uniqueness that every student brings to the classroom. We also have several resources that are openly available for teachers, like PLCs and the Bookworms Facebook group, which sounds really silly, but it's a great resource to build that community amongst teachers as well. And so Beth was speaking to this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear from all of you when we think about some of the factors around classroom equity. I'm wondering, what are some of those factors that feel the most relevant to your students in Milford? Like culture, ethnicity, gender, immigration status, learning style, physical and or cognitive disabilities, race, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. Which of those feels, or combination of them, feels the most important and relevant right now? Knowing that they're all important.
I know from my side, culture and immigration status is huge at our school. We have a very diverse population.
Okay.
So that's important for our climate and program.
Yeah. Okay. And with that, are you seeing like a lot of multilingual learners?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And newcomers.
Population.
Okay.
Ethnicity, race, and religion.
Yeah. It's hard to say which is the most important. They're all important. But always helpful for me to know what's kind of top of mind for you right now, so we can frame our conversation around that. And so with that, we will dive into Bookworms. You may have already met Bookworms from any one of these resources. It was the program featured in the Right to Read documentary. I actually learned about Bookworms through Natalie Wexler's book, The Knowledge Gap. And as a classroom teacher, I used Dr. Walpole's book, How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction. Again, this is a resource that you might already be familiar with, and it is a part of the Bookworms program. And so this is Dr. Sharon Walpole. She is the author of Bookworms. She was and still is an early literacy professor at the University of Delaware. She is wonderful. She and I get to talk all the time, which is really neat. She has a range of professional texts, one of them being that K-2 differentiated instruction book. But a little more than 10 years ago, when we saw the 3 big shifts with the Common Core around students reading a range and a volume of text and being able to use evidence from text, that is when she started her work on writing out a full comprehensive program with the goal of removing as many barriers as possible so all students could access and achieve at the level that is laid out in the Common Core. And so with Bookworms, we see a few big pieces. One of them is research-based practices. Because Dr. Walpole is a researcher, there are a range of evidence-based practices that are embedded in the curriculum, and I will highlight those as we move through the program today. Also, we see a range of streamlined structures. This is really twofold. On one side, Dr. Walpole, because she works with pre-service and in-service teachers, she really wanted to make sure that Bookworms is a program that is rigorous and realistic and has a high level of usability to actually teach it and implement it and do all of the other things that are on our plates as classroom teachers. Those structures are also based in research to support all readers, especially students who might be struggling readers. The third piece is that students are reading a high volume of text, again, in alignment with the Common Core standards and those shifts, and those texts are designed to be high interest, and the lessons themselves are designed to be highly engaging for students when they have real authentic text in their hand. And so additional things, what you must know about Bookworms. Tier 2 RTI is really built into the framework through the differentiated instruction model. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And with that differentiated instruction, what we traditionally think of as guided reading, or what I traditionally think of as guided reading with F&P and LLI, that is replaced with differentiated instruction that is grounded in structured literacy. So we're shifting to a focus on skills rather than level text. Also, only authentic texts are used in the program. The reading piece is quite rigorous, which is intentional. Number one, keep students engaged and excited about reading. Number two, to support their vocabulary development. And number three, especially in K-2, to support their oral language development. And oftentimes, students who are multilingual learners, their oral language ability is stronger than what they can do in reading and writing. And so our work is constantly how do we capitalize on that strength and empower them to translate it into the reading and writing that they're doing. So when you walk into a Bookworms classroom, it's never usually quiet. There's always a buzz. Students are talking. There's a lot of conversation about the text that they're reading. I know that you're coming from Teachers College, and so we will see some similarities with the way that writing is structured with Bookworms. The lessons are genre-based, and there's a combination of foundational writing skills instruction and writing strategy instruction, which I personally really love. And there are three intact, or three segments or components of Bookworms. Each of them is 45 minutes. 45 minutes for shared reading, ELA, and differentiated instruction. We're going to talk about what each of those mean. But in my conversations with Beth, we've been thinking about how this can fit into your current schedule, and how shared reading kind of aligns with Reader's Workshop, ELA kind of aligns with Writer's Workshop, and the differentiated instruction component could be used as a resource for what you're already doing in your foundational skills time. Is everyone okay if I sit down?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so I don't think we can have a conversation about literacy without an image of Scarborough Throat on the screen. So thinking about the three main components of Bookworms and how they align with the literacy strands. Shared reading and ELA are really addressing the language comprehension strands, where we're building background knowledge and funds of knowledge and vocabulary with students. Down below, to address the word recognition strands, for Milford, this is where UFly would come in rather than shared reading. So there is a word study component with Bookworms. It would be omitted for what you already have in place with UFly. And I work with a range of districts that use this model. There are a couple already here in Connecticut, and they're seeing some really nice results already, which is exciting. And so I think of UFly as your tier 1 instruction. That's going to be grade level skills instruction. And the work that's happening in the DI block is going to meet students where they are. I know this is really small on the screen. I'll share, once we dive into the materials, I'll share a digital version of this with you so you can look at your specific grade level. I'm sure you want to do that. I'll voice over it for now and kind of have my moment of complaining because I get very frustrated with the way the media is portraying the science of reading and the shift to the science of reading. Because there's this focus on just phonics from legislators and leaders. And yes, we know phonics is important. It's been missing, it is needed. And at the same time, we can't forget all of these other strands of reading and language comprehension. And so Dr. Walpole wanted to write a program that really was comprehensive and built background knowledge and really supported students in building proficiency across all those language comprehension strands. And so over the course of 4 modules throughout a school year, students are reading, writing, thinking, and talking about conceptually connected texts across shared reading and ELA. The topics and the texts were selected by Dr. Walpole in a couple of different ways. She looked at some of the actual texts that were listed out in the appendices of the Common Core State Standards, and she selected some of those to support text complexity with the Lexile levels across grade bands. In terms of the topics, she looked at science and social studies instruction across the country and made as much alignment as possible. Again, really trying to get it, building background knowledge and world knowledge for students, and also, again, supporting effectiveness and efficiency in teaching and knowing that we only have so many instructional minutes in a day. In my experience as a second grade teacher, science and social studies, if we got to it once a week, that was a win. And so how can we incorporate that into the work that we're already doing in reading and writing, where students are engaging with topics that are meaningful to them and also address some of the science and social studies standards. Okay, so at this point we're going to move through each component, shared reading, ELA, and differentiated instruction. Any questions or thoughts so far? Okay. All right, so we'll start with shared reading. I'm going to address grades 1 through 5 first, and then we'll shift to kindergarten because kindergarten is special. It's a little bit different, and the block is designed for emergent readers, so we'll go there next. I'm going to skip right over word study for now, because especially in K-2, that's your focus is you fly there. So in shared reading, the way you would implement it here in Bookworms, you would really focus on what is called text engagement in the program. And so there are lots of different ways that shared reading is defined and people think about shared reading. With Bookworms, the focus is really fluency and comprehension and giving all students access to grade level comprehension work. As I shifted my mindset from level text to structured literacy, this gave me heartburn a little bit. At first I was like, ooh, everyone's reading the same book. What if they can't access this text independently? They should be having access to this text with support from the teacher. And so that is the work that we see here, because we know that if students are always stuck in simple texts, they're never going to get to work on those language comprehension strands. And that's going to keep them likely perpetually stuck in that space. And so yes, they need the word reading work happening at their targeted to where they are, and they still need to work on these language comprehension strands. And so that's what we see happening here. So what this looks like in the classroom is that the teacher has the book, the students have the book in their hand, except for kindergarten. Just the teacher has the book in kindergarten because 25-year-olds trying to get to the same page is a little scary. So everyone has the book in their hands in grades 1 through 5, and we're setting a purpose for reading around making meaning from the text. So for example, how are these two characters interacting? What does that tell us about their relationship? And where do we see evidence of that in the text? So from there, we move into a whole class choral read
which is an evidence-based practice for supporting decoding and fluency in students. So everyone is reading out loud all together. You're going to have students in your class who are not going to be able to read every word, and the goal is for them to follow along. That's part of some of the expectation setting, that this is something new we're doing. Everyone has different skills and strengths, and it's okay if you're not able to read every single word. Our goal with this work is to be thinking about the book all together, and that's the work we're doing together. So after we do that choral read, we're revisiting the first purpose and having a quick discussion about it and setting a new purpose for rereading that same piece of text. So we've got a whole class choral read, followed by a repeated read. Again, repeated reading, another evidence-based practice to support fluency in decoding and comprehension. And that repeated read is done with the peer-assisted learning strategy, meaning that students there's guidance in the program in how to create reading partnerships that are equitable and support students in being successful in doing that partner reread. Or you might not put your strongest reader with your weakest reader in the room. We're going to kind of ladder them so they're able to read the text together in a way that works. While students are doing this partner rereading, which is quick, it's only about 7 to 10 minutes, there are a couple of ways to do some really nice differentiation right within the lesson. Again, I'm going back to what was mentioned with students who are multilingual learners, maybe students who are newcomers. During this partner reread time, I might work with a group of students who have IEPs or maybe are multilingual learners in a small group as a classroom teacher and do a choral read with them over again and kind of lead that small group to scaffold. I also might decide to challenge some of my students who are reading maybe above grade level or above the grade level standards to write about the comprehension questions that come at the end of the lesson. So maybe they're doing some stopping and jotting as they're doing their partner reread, because also they're likely going to buzz right through that reread and be done in a couple minutes. The other thing I forgot to mention with the small group that I might do a choral read with and do some scaffolding, I would probably preview the comprehension questions that come at the end of the lesson with them, so they are able to then better participate in that discussion. So to close the lesson, there is a closing comprehension discussion. We are always updating an anchor chart because every day we're reading another piece or chapter of the book, and that anchor chart is always going to be grounded in text structure. So if it's a fiction piece, I appreciate your enthusiastic head nod. Thank you. It always makes you feel good. Snapping along. No, I love it. If it's a fiction piece, it's typically going to be story map, and I'll show you some examples of what those look like. Also, when we get to ELA, there are graphic organizers that can be used as the anchor charts for shared reading, which is really nice. And when students will use those graphic organizers during writing time, they're not going to be totally new to them. They will be familiar because you will use them during shared reading. And then at the end of the block, there is a written response. Typically, this is done during the differentiated instruction time at Bookworms. But because you're not doing word study, it could be done right within the lesson. That's an instructional choice that down the road we would need to talk about and make. So I'm just gonna get access an example lesson. We've talked about it abstractly, but I think looking at an example is always helpful. I taught second grade, so I'm going to pull up the second grade lesson. So this is the website. Again, we'll have time to access it together. And this is exactly what the teacher manuals look like, which is also really nice. So
You will not have to be reading through materials, deciding what you do and don't have to teach with word study. You're just going to skip right to the text engagement component of a lesson. There is also always a vocabulary word that is introduced at the beginning of shared reading. Typically a tier 1 word when we're reading fiction, tier 2 or tier 3 vocabulary words when we're reading nonfiction text. And the routine is quite simple. Teacher says the word, prompt the students to say it. This is that call and response. What word? All the students repeat the word out loud. Teacher defines the word, and then students will often turn and talk to the partner and use that word in context. So again, another piece with oral language and vocabulary and developing those skills. Make this a little bit bigger. Then thinking about our first focus, this is where we're making meaning from the text. So as we read today, think about what Ralph's bad decision was. The book we're reading is, in this example, is Rotten Ralph. And then moving into that whole classical read. Everyone reading out loud all together. Discussing that first focus and setting a new lens for the repeated read. So as you're reading again, think about what is surprising to you about the events in this chapter. So this is that partner rereading time. Again, 7 to 10 minutes. Time to do some quick differentiation in the lesson, warranted. And here's our closing comprehension discussion. Typically 2 to 4 questions. We're also going to see here that these questions are a little bit more complex. So we're thinking about figurative language, we're doing some inferencing work because now students have had 2 reads of the text. Here's the anchor chart work. So in this example, it's a story map. And then the written assignments are always at the bottom. Half of it will be word study, so again, you will omit that. The other half will be text-dependent analysis or writing about reading. Yes?
Are these lessons all digital online, or is there also a manual to follow as well?
Both.
Can help.
Yes. Yep. So in addition to this, you would have a manual like this. And what's nice is that it looks very similar to what we see on the screen. There are also, back to it here. There are also slides for every lesson, which is really nice. They're really designed to be teacher supports. They could be, some of the slides could be adapted as student scaffolds just to have some of the questions on the screen. Really simple. Actually, I was in South Windsor yesterday and there's a teacher who has been using the shared reading slides. She has students on the carpet facing away from the smartboard and facing her. So she's looking at the smartboard and the slides as she teaches. And I was like, oh, that's so smart, because then you don't have to like put Post-its in your book. You can just follow the slides and click along. And so again, it follows the exact pace of the lesson, just like we saw. So here's that first focus for reading, foreread, discussion, exact same pace of the lesson. I have my phone just so I can keep track of time and make sure I keep this on pace. Let's move to kindergarten. And then I do have a demo video that I can share with you. Unfortunately, it's not in classroom with real students. We're so limited by video releases and what we can share. I have better demo videos for the ELA block, but I think it's still worth the time to watch it. Okay, so kindergarten. I'm actually going to pull up kindergarten right on our website. kindergarten. Shared reading. Similar instructional goal, similar layout, but designed for emergent readers. So just students, just the teacher is controlling the text in kindergarten. So there are big books that are available to order with Bookworms if you wanted. You could also have the book under the document camera displayed for all the students to see. And we are doing a repeated read of the same book over the whole course of the week in kindergarten, Monday through Friday. So I think of like Rosie's Walk as an example. And so on Monday, we're reading that book straight through and asking basic questions like who, what, where, when, why. We get increasingly more complex with those comprehension discussions over the course of a week versus over the course of a lesson in grades 1 through 5. And then also throughout the week, we're introducing vocabulary words using picture cards before and after reading. Throughout the week, students are practicing oral retelling, making connections to text, and all of that is done through the teacher model and then students trying it. The dialogic reading, what we were just talking about, this is really the heart of shared reading in kindergarten. There are movement breaks built in, which is really nice. There's also phonological awareness and concepts of print in Bookworms. And so again, I would say this is another inflection point and place to decide what are you already addressing with Haggerty and how could this be used for Bookworms. Like for example, I was working with Region 4 a few weeks ago in Essex, and they are using Haggerty in kindergarten. And we were looking at the phonological awareness piece of the shared reading lessons, and they were like, maybe we could use this for homework. Like maybe we can send, everything is based in a poem or a rhyme. And so they were thinking about maybe we can send these poems and rhymes home for students to practice like in a homework packet or something every week. If you decided it was something that was duplicative and you wanted to use Haggerty in place of this. But I'll speak to what it looks like. So again, teacher is sharing a poem, either big book or up on the screen, reading the poem through on Monday, and then throughout the week we're working with that poem in different ways, like echo and choral reading, listening for rhyming words, listening for syllables and words, and then identifying letters and words. So again, getting increasingly complex over the course of the week. Word study would be omitted in place of U-Fly. And then the block ends with concepts of print. So again, using a poem or a rhyme, very similar to what we do with phonological awareness, but practicing concepts of print skills like finger pointing, return sweep, getting that one-to-one down in kindergarten, all the skills that are really important for our emergent reading friends. Questions about kindergarten shared reading? So we'll quickly watch the demo. Hopefully the sound works. Maybe we're not. The sound is only coming through here. I don't know if there's an easy fix for that. If there's not, we can very easily omit this.
You tell me you want me to come up?
That's okay. We'll come back to it. And I can also share it so everyone can watch it as we're looking through materials. That actually might be a better way because there are a few different grade levels, so you might want to look at your specific grade level. So we'll see. All right, so summarizing shared reading. Teacher-supported grade level reading, I think of it as like a whole class close read. Only using authentic text. aligned to the Common Core for text complexity. And we've talked about some of the skills that are being targeted, like fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. And with that, we will move into ELA. I think this is where you will see the most similarities to the work that you're already doing with Teachers College, which again, I could go on a whole other conversation about that. I think there are some real beautiful parts of the units of study and also some parts that we know we need to make some changes to, and that's why we're having this conversation. So I think of the ELA block as a hybrid. Some of the lessons are interactive read-alouds, and some of the lessons are process writing sessions, and they're strategically linked. So the interactive read-alouds are used as mentor texts for the process writing that students are doing. That is very familiar with Writer's Workshop. I should say Teachers College Writer's Workshop. What we're also doing with those read-alouds is working on foundational writing skills through summarizing, written response, and sentence composing. So there's a really big focus in Bookworms with sentence level work. Again, another evidence-based practice for supporting all readers and writers, especially those students who might be multilingual learners or struggling readers and writers. Because yes, it is important for students to write across pages and to do a volume of writing, and they need to know what a sentence is. So starting in kindergarten, we're learning about subject and predicate, parts of a sentence, and that stays with them K through 5. If you are familiar with the book Patterns of Power, and you've used any of that strategy in your classroom, it is the same research and strategy that is plugged in here into Bookworms, which made me really excited because I was like, oh, I was always trying to fit that in somewhere, and here it is. So with the sentence composing work and the way grammar is addressed in Bookworms is that we're always using a mentor sentence from the read aloud. We're working with that sentence for students to imitate it, expand it, combine it. So I'll show you an example of what that looks like. So, second grade lesson. This is an interactive read aloud lesson. So we've got all the prompts for the book here. Again, there are slides just like we saw for shared reading. So if you didn't have the time to necessarily mark up your book and add post-its or do all the prompting, you could use those slides as your guide. There's a quick discussion. We're updating our anchor chart. We're talking about vocabulary. And here's that sentence composing work that I was just speaking about. So we are pulling a mentor sentence from the text. In this example, we're unscrambling it. So we're looking for subject and predicate. Oh, okay, they woke up, both a subject and predicate. Breakfast can also be a subject. If I start with breakfast and then predicate, breakfast was coming down. Okay, that's a complete sentence. Now let's work with they woke up. We can add a detail about when. They woke up in the morning. That's a complete sentence. What we have left is by the time. That must be telling when. Let's decide which one comes first. We add the linking words to the first one, and then we can place the entire thing at the beginning or the end. End up with the original sentence. There's typically always an application piece as well, where students are doing some of their own writing making their own sentence. And in kindergarten, it's more of an oral language focus where they are saying that sentence out loud in a small group or in a partnership. So in this example, another mentor sentence from the text, there was a fog. What kind of fog? Can we add adjectives? When did it happen? Why did it happen? So students are writing their own sentence using that. And then there is a written response as well. In this example, in this specific lesson, we're modeling a written response to tee up for a the writing that students are doing the following day in this lesson, where they're writing their own weather report using Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs as the mentor text, which I think is so fun. Okay. So kind of going back to the two parts of the ELA block and Bookworms, we've discussed the interactive read-alouds. And now we're going to talk about a little bit more about the process writing. So those mentor texts, those interactive read-alouds, I've used those terms interchangeably. I'll stick with interactive read-alouds. The read-alouds are supporting students in learning the characteristics of the genre. We're evaluating examples and non-examples of the genre through our writing process lessons, and those examples are provided for you in the lessons. Then students are planning, drafting, editing, revising as they go through the writing process. To scaffold and support their independence, there are graphic organizers as they plan and draft. Again, those graphic organizers can also be used as the anchor charts in the ELA block. So there's a connection between the two, and they're constantly doing that work and building that text structure knowledge. There are also checklists for students to do their own revising work and to be self-reflective. Again, that is a familiar resource knowing that you're coming from Teachers College. In terms of evaluating students in writing too, there are rubrics that you use as a teacher to evaluate writer's craft as well as editing and revising. There's a separate rubric for that. Thinking about the structure of a writing process lesson, it always starts off with a 10-minute teacher model. Students have an independent work session where during that teacher model time, the teacher is introducing an explicit writing strategy, and students are applying that writing strategy in their own writing. This is also time again to do some of that differentiation. Maybe I'm doing transcribing for students. Maybe I'm supporting a group of students in completing their graphic organizers. At the end of the lesson, there's a share. Again, going back to the research that supports this model. This is based in the writing strategy called Self-Regulated Strategy Development, or SRSD, which aligns with the model I just explained, which is building background knowledge about a genre, introducing a writing strategy that aligns with that genre, and then students trying it with guidance and support from the teacher. It's exactly that model. So summarizing the ELA block, we have the interactive read-alouds to support comprehension, vocabulary, more discussion. These read-alouds are also going to be well above grade level versus the shared reading text is on grade level. We also have grammar instruction using mentor sentences from the read-aloud, and the writing instruction is going to target narrative, informational, and opinion structures. Just another example, too, of the pacing of an ELA block and some of the connections we see between shared reading and ELA. So in grade 2, module 2, this module starts off with students reading nonfiction texts about different groups of Native American people to set them up for the writing that they're doing in the second part of the module in the ELA block, where they're reading legends about Native American people and then using and synthesizing all of that knowledge to create a research report. So every module has a culminating task. Every ELA module has a culminating task. which really is when students go through the entire writing process from start to finish. That will happen at least once every module. Another big shift and change that you'll see with Bookworms is that we're going to rotate through all the different genres in every single module so students become really familiar and flexible with those different genres. So in Unit 1 of Module 2, students are doing narrative writing. Unit 2, Module 2, research report. There's a nice connection to math here in grade 2 where they're writing an earning, savings, and spending plan. Money and place value, which is, I have not taught this, but I would love to see those plans coming from a second grader. And then they end this module with some more narrative writing and opinion writing with a book review. So lots of variety, flexibility, and again, opportunity to always be evaluating those writing standards versus, I remember really struggling with that when we were only doing one genre in each part of the year, and I might not assess students in informative writing until the last part of the year, and that felt, I really struggled with that. So I like this a lot. Okay. This is something great to look at when we're exploring materials. This sample schedule is right on the website. So again, I'll show you how to get onto the website and where this is. This is a scope and sequence document just showing ELA and shared reading side by side. It will give access to you while we're exploring materials. And that brings us to differentiated instruction. So the differentiated instruction block, before I keep going and diving into differentiated instruction, questions on ELA? Yes, go ahead.
About how long are each of the units?
8 to 9 weeks. Oh, sorry, a module is 8 to 9 weeks,
Okay.
always. And the units kind of vary. Typically 2 to 3 to fit into that 8 to 9 week. So there's 8 to 9 week module, and then typically two to 4 units within every module. Does that fully answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Yes.
When the students are writing, is there like suggested paper or just a notebook? Like where are they writing?
Good question. Yeah, in K-2 for the ELA block, my suggestion is, again, very similar to Writer's Workshop where you could use the loose leaf paper and print it out. You might also choose to use a wide ruled composition book. In grades 3 through 5, my recommendation is to shift into that writer's notebook composition book. All good questions. What else? All right, so the differentiated instruction block, as it is written in Bookworms, is 45 minutes. Again, knowing that you're exploring Bookworms, we're slowly transitioning. I think of this as a resource that you could use during your foundational skills time to start. So I'll explain kind of how it's written, and then we can think about how you might use it. So I'll start with what the students are doing independently, and then we'll talk about what the teacher groups look like and how those are formed. So there isn't any whole book instruction here, as I mentioned. When the students are not working with the teacher, they are completing written response from shared reading earlier in the day. They also have time for self-selected reading. And so thinking about student choice and voice, this is a place where they have some of that choice and just time to enjoy reading. There's lots of different opinions and conversations happening right now about independent reading time. I think ultimately where I land and where we land with Bookworms is that We can't quantify everything with data. This is a piece of the program where students just have that time to enjoy and to foster that love of reading, and to have some choice. There are supplemental classroom libraries that can be purchased with Bookworms, with trade books that align with all the module topics, with a range of text complexities, so that students can be able to select books from that library where they can likely read them independently, and also they will align with the module topics to support that background knowledge. I also think about independent reading time in kindergarten, which again is a little bit different. There are decodable passages that are included with Bookworms that could be used as a resource for some of that independent time, in addition to the classroom libraries where we're going to see some basic level text that students can access independently. Another place that I'm just thinking about choice and voice, and going back to the ELA block, as a quick aside, in a lot of the writing that students are doing, there's an overall topic that is provided, but students have choice in what they're writing about. So for example, with their narrative writing they're doing at the end of Module 2 in 2nd grade, they're writing about a personal experience, so they have choice about the experience they're writing about, and also there's a really rich opportunity for them to share and to celebrate all of those unique experiences. Quick aside, back to differentiated instruction. So, as a classroom teacher, I was teaching the units of study, and I was getting my 6-year degree in literacy at Southern, and I slowly adapted my readers workshop time. The more I learned about structured literacy, I was like, ooh, okay. So I used this resource to do a lot of my small group work during readers workshop time. So what I love about this is it really allows classroom teachers to understand where your students are as readers, especially thinking about students who might be struggling readers and kind of like always on the cusp of going in and out of intervention, identifying where those gaps are that those students have, and helping us to teach and address and fill those gaps to help them catch up. And so when I started teaching using this model, that's really when I started to see those students grow. So all of your small groups are driven by a diagnostic inventory, which is really an informal decoding inventory. And so that is what we see on the screen here. This Dr. Wobble calls this a staircase of reading proficiency. And it's really just a visual diagram, a visual of what that diagnostic inventory is. So the bottom step is the first part of the assessment with phonological awareness and word recognition. The next part of the assessment goes into word recognition and fluency with the different syllable types. Then it moves into fluency and comprehension, and vocabulary and comprehension. So going back to my 2nd grade experience, I would have a group of students who would essentially test out of this assessment at the beginning of the year. They would go all the way to the top, and so my focus with those students will really be vocabulary and comprehension, and our small group look more like a book club. I would also have students who were on the first step or on the second step. That small group was very different. We were very explicitly moving through sound letter correspondence, the different syllable types. And sometimes I would have students who were reading on grade level, but they were missing basic things like lens and digraphs. And so being able to use this data to identify those needs is really important. And I see this as a helpful complement to some of the district-wide screeners that we already have. And there are lots of ways to use this. So yes, maybe there are schools that use this inventory with every single student. There are schools that use it just with students who pop on those universal screeners to take a deeper dive and to see what's going on. There are lots of ways, and there are some schools who just use this for students receiving intervention. So again, lots of different ways to use it. The other thing I really like about it is that for each step or for each box, there are templated lesson plans for teachers to follow. So when I think about equity in terms of consistency across classrooms and also supporting teachers, especially those who are new to teaching, who have never taught in this way before, it's really important. So this is an example of what a basic alphabet knowledge template looks like. So the hardest part is grouping your students, and then once that's done, you have lesson plans to follow. So there are 30 basic alphabet knowledge lessons. There are word listen activities, numbered 1 through 30, that plug into each of those lessons. And so you have your template and you plug in the different resources depending on what number lesson you're on. So when I had students who were receiving tier 2 or tier 3 intervention and I needed to go to those data team meetings and have my progress monitoring data, I already had it because I was doing this. And I didn't have to worry about planning these small groups because as a baby teacher, I didn't know what a small group should look like. And also, they take a lot of time to plan. It's always, like for me, that was the first thing where that would fall off the plate when it was too high. So I just like, I think you can tell I love the differentiated instruction component of Bookworms. It can be used with any core program and it's a really great resource. These are just examples of some of the decodable passages that are included. I like that the words are in isolation up at the top, so students can practice that rapid naming work, and then down below read the words in connected text. These are also printable, so you can send them home. You can use them in your small groups. They can be used during some of that independent reading time as an extra scaffold. And the students can circle them, mark them up, highlight them, work with them in lots of different ways. We will talk about assessment. And I have some quick data to share about Bookworms, and then we'll have time to explore. I know I've been talking at you for a long time, so thank you. Bless you. I'm going to just pull up the assessment plan on the website so I can make it a little bit bigger.
Nicole, can I just interrupt for a minute?
Absolutely.
Before we move away from the DI
Yes.
module,
Yes.
or part,
Yep.
segment of your day,
Yep.
it shows that a teacher is meeting with 3 groups during that time, 15 minutes each.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how teachers might manage it if they have more than 3 groups who have differing needs and how they might structure their time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So ideally you have 3 groups. That's not always real life, right? So there is guidance within Bookworms to prioritize students who are working below grade level standards to meet with those students every day. And maybe I'm meeting with my book club group once or twice a week. Because in between those groups, they can be reading that book independently and then we can catch up on the comprehension questions and check in. But the nature of those more explicit phonics-based lessons are much more teacher-led. And so if you have more than 3 groups in your classroom, prioritize the students who are reading below and at set grade level standards.
Kind
so
of
you can
scattering
look at that.
across the week,
Yeah.
you were saying.
Yep. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does, thank you.
All right. So I'm going to pull up the teacher manual from the website. And make it nice and big so we're not squinting. Skipping over word study, because that will be, again, U-Fly. We'll move right into text connection. This is how comprehension is evaluated with Bookworms through text connection assessments. These are administered directly through, I believe it's shared reading, through the shared reading block on a weekly basis. They're embedded right within the lesson, so you don't need to take extra time to do the assessments, which is nice. And students are writing in response to text. And I also think about K-1, students are illustrating or speaking in response to text. There isn't an oral reading fluency screener with Bookworms because so many schools are using screeners like Dibbles or Acadians, and so that is where that screener would plug in here. Dr. Wolpel didn't want to be duplicative. We assess enough, we don't need another thing. The next few lines are going to be the differentiated instruction components. So there's the informal decoding inventory, which is that staircase we were just looking at. If warranted, there's also a high frequency word inventory. It's the fry list. I think about that being more applicable to K1, maybe early 2. And then there's progress monitoring assessments when students are placed into those DI groups. Again, especially helpful for data team meetings for students who are receiving Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention. The next few lines, and really the rest of it, shifts to ELA and students writing. There's a rubric for each genre of writing. Again, that's familiar. There's a rubric for editing, speaking and listening, and also one for content knowledge. So anytime there's a culminating task, like again, for example, the Native American research report in 2nd grade, there's going to be a specific rubric for that culminating task that's going to address some of the background knowledge that has been developed through the reading in that module. So as you're looking through the resources and you want to explore your grade level, I'll just show you one more time how I got to this. So if you go to teacher, your grade level, and then scroll down to teacher manual. This upper left-hand drop box is going to be your main place to look. I always miss it. I want to look at this one. But if you click into planning for success, that will bring you to the assessment plan here. There's also a resource button on the top right-hand corner of the screen. If you click into printable downloads, you can see all of the rubrics that are used, all the graphic organizers, all the checklists, all the text excerpts used in the ELA lessons. Everything is here for you as you review materials. I also recommend looking at the scope and sequence document. This is a new resource. And if you wanted to see assessment across a school year, specifically those culminating task rubrics, you can also see them in one place here for each. There's one rubric for each module.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just for some of these pieces where we're clicking on these different links, are these things that are live that change over time, or is it something where if we wanted to print it out, we would have the most readily available one as we do that?
If you print it, you'll have the most readily available.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. I'll quickly just touch on our philosophy around professional learning. We think about it as coaching and support rather than training. I don't like that word. Again, a program is a resource. Teachers are the invaluable resource. You have the knowledge and expertise around the pedagogy and making decisions that we know are best for students. And so that's how we like to work with you. We have a range of options that really can be customized to your needs and where you are and what your students most need. Going back to our 3 pillars of equity and our community. Bookworms Facebook group, again, I know it sounds silly. Dr. Walpole has been convinced to join the group. She's now in there answering questions. Also Aisha Dent, who is our lead literacy specialist for Bookworms, she is in there answering questions. So if you have just random things that are coming up for you and you want to see the good, bad, and the ugly, this is a great place to go. We also have monthly PLCs that again are free. They're led by community coaches who are teachers that are teaching the program right now. Another place to go and ask questions and get support. As we're coming up on June, they're ending because the teachers will be on summer break, but we have a bank of recordings that you can see, and then they'll also, of course, they'll start back up again in September. And I'll end today with just some more data, knowing how important research and efficacy is in making this decision. So this data set comes from Seaford School District in Delaware. This data is now part of a peer-reviewed study that was published, and this is part of a randomized control trial. So Bookworms is the only program that currently has this level of research and evidence behind it. Again, when a program is written by a researcher, she wants to prioritize the research and the data. So across 2015 to 2018, there were about 9,000 students that participated in this study. So looking at, it's hard to see on this screen, but this is a red line here. These are the students who are receiving Bookworms instruction that were participating in the study. This black line is the state level benchmark. As I mentioned, this is the Seaford School District in Delaware. About a third of the students participating in this study are multilingual learners. So at the beginning of grade 3, these students who are reading below that state level benchmark, and they close the gap between grades 3 and grades 5, with similar results being replicated in the second and third cohorts. Where I think this data is especially telling, again, especially thinking about, and I will try to be so kind, when I think about high achieving districts here in Connecticut, where generally all the students are doing well, but then when we look at subgroup data of students, there are some really big disparities. And that's part of the legislation and the work that we're seeing now with the Right to Read Act is how are we making sure that we're reaching and supporting all students. That work is challenging and it's hard, but it's really important. And so when we looked at subgroup data for students identifying as African American, again, that cohort of students starting off below the state level benchmark and far outpacing by the end of grade 5. Similar story in the second and third cohorts. And for students who are multilingual learners, very similar results where they were far outpacing the state level benchmark in all 3 cohorts of the study, which is really exciting. So with that, that's really the end of my spiel. Beth, I don't know if you want to give everyone maybe